Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian Sanabria, host of the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast, and I'm here to host another installment of SC Media's In Focus. These interviews feature some of the top thought leaders in the cybersecurity space. This is an opportunity for these experts to share hindsight on recent events and foresight on where you should be focused as a cybersecurity professional in the near future. Today, we're discussing findings from Fortinet's recently released threat intelligence report focused on threat actors targeting the 2024 Summer Olympics. Joining me today is Derek Manky, Chief Security Strategist and Global VP of Threat Intelligence at Fortinet. Derek leads the FortiGuard Labs Global Threat Intelligence Team, which is where the data from this report comes from, along with FortiRecon, Fortinet's SaaS-based digital risk protection service. Derek, I'm excited to be chatting with you again today.
Adrian, it's always fascinating and great conversations we had that we do have. So I'm really looking forward to this as always, and it's great to chat to you as well.
And did I say that right? The FortiRecon, how do the Threat Labs and FortiRecon, how's all that work together?
So, I mean, this is all part of our threat intelligence team, right? Forty Recon is our reconnaissance. So if you look at the kill chain, you have all the different phases of the attack. Forty Recon is pretty special because it sits on the left. We always talk about shifting left in terms of protection, visibility, intelligence, and that's where it sits on the reconnaissance phase of the kill chain. And what we do is EASM, so external attack surface monitoring. That means we have a team of experts. We have a threat intelligence portal. We have a lot of machine learning and automation behind. So that whole stack into looking at what are cyber criminals and attackers up to, right? What are they chatting about? We look at dark web, so forum, interactions, like literal interactions with cyber criminals. We can understand what their targets are, what their latest innovations, kits that they're selling, crime services, as well as not just dark web, but channels as well, like Telegram. We don't live in the world of the 1990s and
Yeah.
IRC, if you remember that, the Internet Relay Chat. So it's all these different things, right, that we're looking at. It's actually a very active area, for threat intelligence.
All right. Well, let's jump into it. So the 2024 Olympics are at Paris this year, and they've got all kinds of threats they've got to worry about. They've got to worry about the threat of pollution in the river that they're hoping to have some of the events in. They've got to worry about the threat of labor strikes at the airport, at the Paris airport, and now cyber threats on top of all those other threats. Where do you think this should fall in priorities in terms of the other threats there? Do you think cyber is at that level, like the reliance on IT systems and things like that is and the internet is high enough to rate among those other threats?
Yeah, it's definitely, history has taught us this before, Adrian. We've seen this in past sporting events, not just sporting events, but anything that is headline news, anything that is high traffic, right? Traffic equals cash to cyber criminals specifically. And then you have obviously the Olympics, it's a global event. You mentioned, there's a political angle. So it's not just cyber crime, right? We expect, and we have seen before, cyber crime monetization attacks. That's always the biggest chunk of volume and attacks that we see. But then there's also other flavors. I mean, it's literally a potpourri, right, of all these different attacks coming together where you have cybercrime, you have hacktivism, so geopolitical targets, you have financially motivated attacks, you have, again, cyber criminals just trying to make a buck and expand their crime services, looking at and targeting organizations in France to look at PII, things that can be used in phishing campaigns and social engineering because it is a world stage event. Again, these things just resonate with people. It's top of mind, and what better place than the Olympics from an attacker's perspective, right? We see this with natural disasters. We see it with the elections. Anything that's big news and world stage. But with the Olympics, it's something that we've seen this before.
Yeah, and ticket scams are a big thing. And right here in your report, you say that Paris is expected to welcome over 15 million tourists during the games. So that's a big target for scams, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So typo squatted domains, this is something we see regularly. So we actually do that with 40 Recon and the EASM. We can monitor that. We see it with, enterprise and in the private sector and even governments quite frequently, right? When it comes to MDM, so malinformation, disinformation, misinformation campaigns, hacktivism, website defacement, even just exploiting these sites like type of squatted domains for monetary gain, like ticket scams, as you mentioned, cross the boards again. But again, it's anything that cyber criminals can do to make a quick buck. So it's all the above, right? We see the ticket scams, we see phishing campaigns in there, we see, as I mentioned, uh, organizations in France targeted. We see uh, phishing attacks, right? That are related to the games. So things like SMS, man in the middle attacks, and spoofing, all of those things combined into one. It literally is a big list, and I think that's what's unique about this. It's not just one campaign that's that's happening. It's a very wide range of activity.
Everything.
Yeah, it's a 90% increase in attacks that we saw through our EASM with organizations in France just from the second half of last year to the first
Right.
quarter. So we're already seeing a lot of planning that's taking place.
Yeah, and it's one thing that struck me in this report is usually you have to go hunt for threat intelligence, but there's a laundry list of threat actors here, including Lulzsec, who I didn't realize was still around in any form, that have announced their intent to disrupt or hack the games in some way. How do you deal with the threat actors basically announcing the thing that they're going to do? Like do you have to go out and validate how credible those threats are? Like I imagine that makes prioritizing a little bit difficult if everybody says they're going to do everything during the Olympics.
Yes. So, I mean, of course, announcements like that help because it's visible. So we do see that. Again, this comes up in the channels that we monitor. It comes up in, on the dark web forums, of course. And we have, by the way, in our report itself, in the 40 Recon report, we have some great screenshots of this. So if any viewers want to
Yeah,
see that, great
yeah,
reference, right? Just to see how they actually communicate and advertise this. And it's not just LulzSec, but yes, LulzSec is on there. Of course, in the world of threat intelligence, when we see that, we're not just waiting for them to do something. We do attribution. We're looking at these groups. We have mappings of these groups into infrastructure they use, kits they use. So we're talking about ASNs and IP ranges and domains that they're using, but also malware and exploits that are tied to them. All those things we actually look at and we hunt for, right? That's part of the threat hunt. So we're continuously monitoring that to see if we see anything above the baseline that's indicating that they're moving and an attack's happening. So we're that's part of that shifting left is we're being proactive. We're not just waiting for an attack to happen. Now, if you look at the history, we've seen this before, right? It's a mix of cybercrime, like in the Tokyo Summer Games. That
right.
was unprecedented. We saw 400 plus million attacks, and a lot of that was similar to this, again, cybercrime motivated. But then looking in 2018 in Pyeongchang, we saw Olympic Destroyer, very different, right? This is nation state wiper technology. So it's happened before with these targeted attacks, but we also see a lot of the volume of cybercrime.
Yeah, that was a very interesting part of the report to me because I didn't really know the history of attacks, cyber attacks on sporting events, and yeah, it's not just Olympics in there. You're talking about NFL and a number of other events that got hit with attacks. But yeah, it seems like disruption is kind of a going to be a key one. Like the wipers are scary stuff, right? Like especially following the recent CrowdStrike disruption that we saw. That was just accidental. Somebody trying to do it on purpose. That was at least recoverable. We're talking about attacks that are intended to not be recoverable.
Yeah, and if you look at what's happened with the wipers, specifically in Ukraine, right? We talked about this before. We saw a lot of those deployed 2 or 3 years ago. but it's being now monetized as well. So it's not just nation state, it's being put into cybercrime playbooks like ransomware. Again, going to the Olympics and what to expect in, coming up is that we talk about infrastructure. So we've talked about, travelers going there that can be targeted, French organizations. We've talked about the hacktivism angle. But again, and obviously things like PII, so personally identifiable information, logins and passwords, all of these things that are being sold, combo lists, we call them, right? Being sold on the dark web. Those are all elements of this. But then you have the Olympics itself, right? I mean, this is a major event. You have infrastructure there. You have anything, mission critical things, anything like that that goes down can have huge implications. And so those are dollar signs to cyber criminals because they look at that infrastructure and they know that if they can, it's just like manufacturing and operational technology. They know if they can take down these services, specifically with ransom, not just data, but services, they can demand a high ransom. So there's a high likelihood of those types of attacks to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the things that occurred to me here is, especially after the RockU 2024, and you mentioned combo list, which was a term I hadn't heard before, which distinguishes from password list because you've got both things that you need, right? The username and the password. But
Yep.
your RockU 2024 dominated a lot of headlines, that there's 10 billion passwords and stuff like that. And when I dug into it, I found a lot of fluff in there, you're really just kind of faking that number, and a lot of reused stuff from RockU 2021 and stuff like that. So I wonder if we could have an outcome where everything pretty much went okay, but because the attackers are so effective at propaganda, especially in social media, that it seems a lot worse than it actually was.
Yeah, I think that all comes down to end users again, planning against security awareness, and that goes a long way. I mean, specifically with Rocky, as you're talking about, specifically with credential stuffing, which is a very common attack we see in these combo lists being sold. Again, it gets down to the basics, right? We're talking about multi-factor authentication, changing your password, all those things. Yes, it sounds really bad because, again, if you even look at those combo lists that we're seeing with FortiRecon that are being sold on dark web, we're not talking about a list of like 10 targeted passwords. We're talking about hundreds of thousands. And most of the cases, we have a screenshot in the report showing over 800,000, you know, credentials being sold in a combo list. So that sounds bad, but again, if that's being mitigated and you have all the security practices in place, like MFA and SASE and all those different things, EDR for endpoint protection, it really mitigates a lot of that risk, right?
In addition to that, the combo lists and that data that attackers can use, you also focus on a lot of the tools that are out there. I didn't realize, I mean, this isn't, where I spend a lot of my time, but I was fascinated, again, with the screenshots in the report of all the different toolkits that are out there for sale. There's SMS man-in-the-middle kits, there's phishing kits, info stealers, of course, I'm pretty familiar with. Those have been behind a lot of big attacks. But it seems like all those are going to make it even easier for a lot of these scams, particularly focused on, I would think, the attendees and fake, tickets that are way too cheap, too good to be true to the Olympics.
Yep, yeah, phishing kits as well. We've seen customized phishing kits being sold, so it's really turnkey. I mean, this is a thing especially when you look at the screenshots and like what we daily interact with and look in our threat hunts with Recon. This is a growing array of crime services. Again, they're innovative, right? So it's something 15 years ago when I was looking at it was very basic. I mean, there were crime services back then. It was simple things like botnets being sold for DDoS services or phishing campaigns, so mass mailing, right? Now it's all it's a growing array. So you mentioned SMS services, man in the middle, phishing kits that are being sold, ransom as a service. You have initial access brokers, so those organizations with the Olympics in France that are being targeted when they're compromised, access, so Active Directory credentials, those sorts of things are being sold and auctions in some cases on dark web as well too. So it just continues to expand. It's a portfolio of crime services that they're building, and they're using tools to do this, of course, and selling those tools too.
And because the list of threats is so long, your list of recommendations in the report is similarly long, probably too many to mention in this video. But where can people, I highly recommend people go check out the report, check out the screenshots, particularly check out the recommendations in there. Where can people find that, Derek?
Sure. So simplest place is on our threat research blog with FortiGuard Labs. So it's on fortinet.com/blog. You'll find our blog on the Olympics, a nice summary. There's a link in that blog to the more detailed report with all the screenshots, all the good details in there, and of course the recommendations too.
Great stuff. And with that, we've been talking to Derek Manky from Fortinet. Derek, thank you for being in focus with us today.
Thanks. It was a great chat, Adrian.